Welcome back to day 8. Today, our goal, given an unfactorable quadratic, you will be able to solve for the zeros by using the completing the square method. So today, we're going to learn a new method to solve our quadratics. So what this means, all right, let's say you get an equation and you cannot use GCF. You cannot use dots. You cannot use trinomial. You cannot use grouping. Well, we're not going to give up. Instead, we're going to use what's called the completing the square method. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's learn how to do that. All right, here's my little warning for you. Completing the square is a longer process, but it is an easy process. Okay, so take everything in stride. Just pay attention for the first couple of examples. It's long, but it's an easy process. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So here is our quadratic. X is being squared. If x is squared, there's two answers, so we always set it equal to 0. But now if I look carefully, can you find two numbers that multiply to -11 and add to -6? Nope. So this is unfactorable. So instead, we're going to use the completing the square method. So here we go. Your first step, make sure your leading coefficient is 1. Yep, we got a 1 there. Next, transform the equation so the C constant is alone on the right-hand side. So we're going to take this 11 and we're going to move it to the right. So we're going to add 11 over. But now I'm going to show you a little bit of the trick for this. Where the 11 was, now we're going to put a square is equal to, now we added the 11 over, and if you add a square to one side, we have to add a square to the other side. Okay, so now we have to figure out what we're going to put in that square. So let's take a look at the next step. Now take half of the linear coefficient, the number in front of the x, and square it. Add this to both sides. Okay, so we're going to look at this equation here. We're going to take the linear coefficient, the number in front of the x, which is a 6, we're going to take that off to the side. And now we're going to do -6. We divide it by 2, so you take half of it. And we take -6 divided by 2 is -3. And then you're going to take that -3 and you're going to square it. So what's -3 times -3? +9. So inside both of these squares, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put a 9. Now we're going to go ahead and factor. Okay, so let's factor this side. Okay, can you think of two numbers that multiply to 9 and add to -6? Well, sure, that's going to be -3 and -3. Now it's the same number, and look at that number. Isn't it the same number as you got over here when you took half? And that's the number that you squared. Ah, not a coincidence, we did that on purpose. And then it's going to be equal to 11 plus 9 is 20. Now we're going to write this as a perfect square. So since we have the parentheses and they're the same, instead of writing it twice, we can write it out just once. And square it is equal to 20. Now we want to solve for x. So we're going to solve the equation and simplify. So to solve this, we need to get rid of the squared. So to get rid of the squared, we're going to take the square root of both sides. And when you have a square root and a squared next to each other, they're going to cancel each other out. So here we have just x minus 3 is equal to, now we learned that when you take the square root of a number, you actually have the positive and negative of the answer. So you get a positive or -20. Now we still need to solve for x, so you have to get the x by itself, so I'm going to transpose the 3 to the other side. So I'm going to add 3. Now remember, you cannot combine a whole number and a radical, so we put the whole number in front. So we're going to get x is equal to 3 plus or minus radical 20. And with that, you have just solved using completing the square. Now we actually can take this one step further. we could actually reduce this radical. So remember our radical unit? So radical 20, we know that that can be reduced to radical 4, radical 5, and the square root of 4 is 2, radical 5. So we could also rewrite this as x equals 3 plus or minus 2 radical 5. Now here's what that plus or minus means. Remember, our x was squared, so there's going to be 2 answers. So that means your first answer for x is going to be x equals 3 plus 2 radical 5. And your second x is going to be x equals 3 minus 2 radical 5. So those are your 2 solutions there. Okay, I know that was a little bit of a longer process, but remember, it's long, but none of those steps were complicated. That was a pretty easy process. So let's go ahead and let's try it again. So solve each by completing the square. So here we go. Here's our quadratic. So the first thing we do is we bring the 12 to the other side. So I'm going to add 12. So then we get x squared minus 4x plus, now we're going to put a square there, equals 12. And then we add a square on that side. Now, we're going to take the middle number and we're going to bring it off to the side. So negative 4, we're going to divide it by 2. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. And then you're going to square it. So negative 2 squared is positive 4. So we're going to take a positive 4 and put it in both of those boxes. So now we can go ahead and factor. So here we're going to get x minus 2. X minus 2 equals 16. Now this is the same thing written twice. So instead of writing it twice, we can write it out just once. Okay, now to get rid of that squared, we're going to take the square root of both sides. All right, and then the square and the square root are going to cancel. We're going to get just x minus 2 is equal to, ooh, look at that. 16 is a perfect square. So what's the square root of 16? It's positive or negative 4. So now we have to bring the 2 to the other side. So we're going to add 2 over here. So now we have x is equal to 2 plus or minus 4. Okay, so let's write this as our 2 answers. So x is equal to 2 plus 4, and x is equal to 2 minus 4. Now these are both whole numbers, so we can combine them. So here we get x is equal to 6, and x is equal to negative 2, and we have our 2 solutions. All right, we're going to go ahead and we're going to skip number 2 because what I'd like us to do is try just one more completing the square. Okay, number 3. Solve by completing the square. Round your answer to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so we're going to round at the end, so you're going to need your calculators. All right, so the first thing we have to do is, well, let's bring everything to one side. So let's bring both of these over. So we're going to minus 6x and minus 1. So we get x squared minus 6x minus 1 equals 0. All right, so now it looks like a typical quadratic. So the first thing we have to do is move the constant to the other side. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And we get x squared minus 6x. Now I'm going to put a square is equal to 1 plus, and I'm going to put a square there. Now we're going to take this middle number. We're going to go off to the side. And I'm going to take that middle number, negative 6, and I'm going to divide it by 2. And we're going to get negative 3. And then you take negative 3 and you square it. So negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. So I put a 9 for both of these. Now we have to factor. So next step, we take this quadratic and we factor it. Can you think of 2 numbers that multiply to 9 and add to negative 6? Well, it's negative 3 and negative 3. It's the same number that you got over here. And the whole thing is equal to 10. Now instead of writing it twice, I'm going to write it out once and square it. So now to get rid of the square, we're going to square root both sides. Now the square root and the squared are going to cancel. And that's going to leave us with x minus 3 is equal to, remember when you take the square root of a number, you get positive or negative of the square root. So now we're going to add 3 to the other side. So x is equal to, now you cannot combine a whole number and a radical, so we put the whole number in front, plus or minus radical 10. So now our two solutions. We get x is equal to 3 plus radical 10, and x is equal to 3 minus radical 10. But the question didn't say to keep it as a radical, it said round to the nearest hundredth. So what we're going to do now is we're simply going to plug it in the calculator. So here we go. 3 plus radical 10, and we get x to be equal to 6.16. And now we're going to do 3 minus radical 10. And we get negative 0.16. And ladies and gentlemen, those are your two solutions for x. All right, what you're going to do next, you're going to work very carefully. So continue to look at this question right here, or the one on the first page. And I'd like you to try both of these here. So the first one, you're going to leave it as a radical. The second one, you're going to plug it in your calculator and you're going to round. If you need any help, come on in tomorrow morning and I can help you out with these. Have a great night, everyone.